All right. So today we are going over Didache 5 through 8 today. And in the first couple of chapters, starts out talking about what the way of life is. And now, starting in chapter 5, it says, "But the way of death, which is first of all evils, and of curses, murder, adultery, lust, sexual immorality, theft, idolatry, magic, use of potions, robbery, false witness, hypocrisy, duplicity, deceit, arrogance, malice, egocentricism, greed, foul speech, jealousy, overconfidence, loftiness, and pretension." So, the way of death is TikTok.
Yeah, right.
But
Man,
no,
let me tell you the
go ahead.
most vile things you will. I mean, you will like. Of course, everything's on there, but that's to be expected. But a person will post something decent, something nice, something wholesome, something that's like just very kind-hearted, and
Mhm.
you will read the most vile comments on this on those. I mean, it's like the worst of people comes out on those comments more so than anything else, than Twitter, Facebook, anything else. I'm not on Instagram, but
Yeah.
it's just it's vile.
Oh, it really is. And the thing is that when I look at and I see this, a vast majority of these things we see on the social media platforms today, and these things are praised. For instance, like one of the things that comes into my feed are, like guitar shorts and all that stuff. They have these short little videos on the YouTube that's like maybe about, I think it maxes out at like a minute. So I think they're trying to do the TikTok thing. I don't use TikTok, will never use TikTok. But, sometimes I'll be going through that for maybe about 5 minutes every day, see what's on there, see if Marty Music has anything new on there. And you see a lot of these girls guitar players wearing skimpy outfits, you know, and all this stuff. And it's like, you guys know what you're doing here with this. You know, you see a lot of that. And the thing is that when we look at things such as what is happening to the erosion of society, a lot of it comes down to these very things. And also in terms of divorce, whenever you go and you see these things, you say, hey, that sounds like, why it is that the divorce rate is so high. Now, it's interesting what the Torah says about unmarried men. They said that they haven't gone and, well, the Didache B'Alpeh, that a man who is not married hasn't gotten the title of Adam. He's still considered an animal. Why? Because of the fact he hasn't learned how to compromise. He hasn't learned, you know, um, how to be giving of himself to another person every minute of every day. And that is what the Torah is engulfed in. So when we see, for instance, 1 Corinthians 13, and we see also what Yeshua says in terms of a person having a lofty place in the Olam Haba, it is through being a servant that, us men are supposed to be servants. Many people see things differently. They see things from a Western context. They see things through a Jackie Gleason mentality, and that is incorrect.
It's absolutely right. Um, these lists of vices, the way of death. Um,
Mhm.
they seem like um, not just the worst of our behavior, potential behaviors, but the opposite of the way of life.
Yeah.
And it's almost as though they took what the way of life is not and just set them out here in principles. The format of listing these this group, well, we'll get into how this looks like a Jewish structure, and it brings up questions that I have about the Didache. And but let's go on with this. And I have like $2 million questions that I want to ask you tonight. And but perhaps we could carry on with this section of chapter 5.
Let's go with chapter 5 first. And one of the things that I want to mention as well is that it's interesting that it talks about these things being the way of death. When we see these things that are listed here, these are things in which has a person engulfed in Yetzirah. And the root of all these things is Yetzirah. One of the greatest sages of all time lived in, I think, Saudi Arabia or Iran in the 11th century. His name was Rabbeinu Bachya. He had written all of his works not in Hebrew, not in Aramaic, but in Arabic. And his I was seeing if his books were close by, but it's all the way over there. But Havot La Havot, which is a 2-book set that is put out by Feldheim. I think Feldheim may have the only mass-produced translation of Havot La Havot, Duties of the Heart, by Rabbeinu Bachya. But in there, he is going over 10 pillars or 13 pillars, and every single, or gates rather, he calls them gates. And one of them is dedicated to the destruction of the Yetzirah. And he tells you everything you need to know about the Yetzirah. Sun Tzu, who was in, I believe, China, said you got to know your enemy. And
Book
so
of Art of War.
yeah, The Art of War, and the old Pogo cartoon, I've met the enemy's me. We need to understand this because Bachya says, the goal of Yetzirah is ultimately to kill you. And you say, whoa, how is my the little devil on my side over here and the angel on my side, how is it that they're affecting me physically? Well, the Yetzirah is going to kill you spiritually. And how, heck, look at all these things that are listed over here. That's a great way to go and kill somebody spiritually. And then if a person is dead spiritually, it then will cause them to go down a path to where it is that they are destructive physically. When you think of drug addicts, alcoholics, people who, sleep around, all of these things are a part of the way of death. So this is a very Jewish concept that has been talked about by all of our sages for a very long time. Philip, do you have any thoughts so far?
I thought when I came across a couple of these in chapter 5, verse 1, I could see how they could be grouped together. And however they are, well, I see groupings, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
And I see different levels within the groups. And the one that stood out to me was hypocrisy and duplicity.
Mm-hmm.
I would think to myself, they are synonyms. But if you read the commentary further down, I think it's on page 220, it goes into depth and detail, and he gives the Greek word for duplicity, which is diplocardia, or diplocardia, meaning double-heartedness, double-mindedness, or deception.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the explanation that the hypocrite uses hypocrisy to get praise from his false
Mhm.
righteousness.
And it says in there he
Whereas
also
the
uses piety as well.
piety, right?
Yeah.
And he uses a false humility, false holiness in order to get praise and to be looked at as if he is a holy person.
Mhm.
The double-minded person is it says here that the duplicitous person only pretends to be pious. His righteousness is a facade. He doesn't really aim or strive to receive praise from men. He just is a double-minded, double-hearted man. And this is I mean, when we see double mind when we hear the word double-minded, to me, I think of Yaakov, Yeshua's
Mhm.
brother. In his letter, it says a double-minded man don't it said do not be deceived. A double-minded man will receive nothing from the Lord.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, it I love how the Didache ties into the words of our sages, our messianic sages,
Mhm.
and Yaakov's letter, and to me that was very revealing, and I enjoyed reading that.
Absolutely. And the thing is, Phil and I had a conversation a couple of days ago about how it is I used to be before I became the person I am now. And I was thinking about that when he was, reading off the definitions here. And the thing is, I could tell you in terms of my own walk and also the person I used to be, and not knowing about the Yetzirah, having to kill it and all that other stuff. Um, Early on, and I don't know if you guys went through this, I know I certainly did. You become a very arrogant person at the beginning, which is, and it's in the use of that piety of, look, well, look at me, I'm, not eating this, I'm not eating that, I'm doing this on Shabbos, and it's this real, and you don't realize you're doing it, but to the root, it is what you're doing, and it can cause destruction to you spiritually when you become so much of a know-it-all. And how, look at how great I am. And Yeshua told a parable about this, as a matter of fact, of how it is that, to look out for people who act in this manner, you know, I mean, heck, I'll tell you, I go and stump my toe, there might be a four-letter word that comes out of my mouth, you know, and I'll try and stop myself, but, sometimes it doesn't happen. The thing is that we mustn't ever put on a persona for anybody. One of the things in terms of, like, the podcasts that I do and all that stuff, the reason why people say that they listen is not because they agree with me. In fact, we got quite a few people that give some very good alternative arguments. And that's awesome because I always say surround yourself with those you don't necessarily agree with because they're the ones you're going to learn the most from. But they say, it's because of the fact that you're real with people, you're not putting on this persona and all that stuff. And that, I think, needs to translate over to any rabbi who is a part of Ani Judaism. Each and every single one of us are different. Each and every single one of us have had our own struggles. We have our own struggles. And it's important to be honest with those things. It's important to not put yourself on this persona like we are so accustomed to that we are above our congregants. Mustn't ever be that way. Ever. Instead, Yeshua says you want to be first in the Olam Haba. What do you got to do? You got to be a servant. You got to, you know. And I think that as we learn, and we're constantly learning, we never stop learning, we realize the less we know. That arrogance kind of kills us a little bit.
Well, it's very true that um, the more you study, the more you realize you don't know because of all the things you weren't able to get to in your studies. You're not able to retain it all. And so the more you know, you don't know. And
Mhm.
the humility that affords, that creates, uh, I see rabbis and young, particularly young rabbis, become very proudful or could become very proudful. But the better, the more seasoned they become, um, it's like it's like being married. You
Yeah,
that's when you learn to think outside of yourself or think only about yourself, and you start to consider building bridges rather than tearing down people.
do you think it's a generational thing, or do you think it's a the ignorance of my youth kind of thing?
I think it's the ignorance of youth. I
Okay.
think that I think that people gain wisdom as they get older. It's like a miracle happens when they turn 40 or some, you know, and they begin to, think more about all their foolishness
Yeah,
than all of their successes, and it becomes a reality to humble yourself before the Lord, and He is glorified in that.
absolutely.
When I
Philip.
was young, I was, um, the rabbis give they describe the life cycles of individuals, and when you're in your 20s, like it says that those are the years of your strength. When you're in your 30s, those are the years of like of learning, and then when you're in your 40s, it just goes on and on. I can't remember all of them, and I remember being young and being a new believer. I was 22 years old and reading, Shaul's, the wise rabbi's admonishment, don't let someone who's young be in a ministry. And we have that admonition.
Mhm.
And it says, he needs to be a husband. He needs to, or, he needs to show that he has a wife, or he can manage a household. And he goes through all this list. And, of course, there are exceptions to the rule everywhere you go. But, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm not going to be one of those people. I'm not going to be haughty. I'm not going to be, you know, and it's something that comes with that age. It's, you have something to prove, and you are strong willed, and you're headstrong, and you don't want to be corrected, and you think you know it all. And I see it in the life cycles of my children, you know, uh, and I have some that are a couple of years apart, and one of them hits a cycle, and it's like they just like the switch was flipped, and it's like, who is this kid? Like they're challenging everything I'm saying, and they don't want to be corrected. They know it all. Dad, you don't understand. You're there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, I don't understand. You're right, I don't understand. And the younger ones like, what's going on with so and so? Why is she acting that way, or why is my brother acting that way? And I'm like, don't worry, I want you to look and observe and listen, look and observe. In a few years, you're going to hit that stage, and I want you to remember we had this conversation. And they hit that stage, and now and I'll bring it up, and I'll say, remember I told you about 2-3 years ago, you're going to hit this life cycle where you think you know it all. And the goal is for me as a parent to reveal that, expose them to that, and admonish to them before they hit that stage, so that when they do, I can sit there and say, okay, remember we had this conversation a few years ago, and I told you, I said, there are going to be some things where you're just going to challenge me on everything. You think you know it all. This is one of those situations. I need you to know that I love you, and I'm not here. I'm not your enemy. I'm not against you. And that's you know, yeah. I think it's 100%. You know, I think with different generations, and our society is decaying more and more anyway. But I think that it can get worse, And every once in a while, and Mark can attest to this, I think you brought this up a while back, where society almost has to reset, you
Mhm.
know, society resets and it's like, okay, and unfortunately, a lot of times it's from catastrophic events that a society resets.
Just like Tish
And
B'Av.
exactly,
Yeah, right.
exactly. And unfortunately, I think the whole world is getting to that point, and we all
Yeah.
know that we all know there's going to be the official messianic Great Reset. We know that's coming,
Right.
and but yeah, no, I think it's youth. It's youth. I don't think it's generational or societal.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There was an incident that happened today. Um, I didn't see all the reports on it. I just know the cliff notes. Kid ended up going and opening fire on the FBI in Miami. And as soon as I went to True Social, I looked on there and the kid was on True Social. And it's
Ah,
interesting because all the things that I ended up reading in this over here, that egocentrism, the foul speech, the overconfidence, the loftiness, the pretension, a lot of those things we saw on his profile on there. you know he's bragging about what it was that he was doing and all this stuff, and ultimately his um Yetzirah did indeed bring him death. you know and I think that in some ways it's our own arrogance to, if we're patriotic about something, or if we're zealous about something, it's like, okay, I'm going to take everything up to 11, and all that stuff. Through that zealousness that can be misplaced, and zealousness in some ways can be good if it's mature zealousness, and not translating to violence, or demeaning people, and all these things. But yeah, let's move on to chapter 6 here. And it's rather short. It says in there, see that no one leads you astray from the way of teaching, because he does not teach you according to God. If you can bear a whole yoke of the Lord, you will be complete. If you cannot, then do what you can. Concerning food, bear what you can, but scrupulously guard yourself from what is being offered to idols, because it is the worship of dead gods. That's that second verse in there, 6:2, where it says, if you could bear the whole yoke of the Lord, you will be complete. But if you cannot, then do what you can. That's huge right there. And we've gone over this several times, so I'm not going to harp on it too much. But many people, they're zealous, like we said before, and they come in after they learn about this Torah thing, and they want to do it all. And then they get into goofiness, and they become a bad witness. You know, um, they kind of forget about Yeshua because everything's Torah, 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 Torah. It's important to realize that in Acts 15, there is that do what you can, and also, don't eat things offered to idols. Before I knew what actual kashrut was, I thought, oh, well, if I just go and buy regular hamburger meat, it's cow, it's good, it's kosher. I didn't know all the things about that until much later on, and all that stuff, and just that process. I'm actually really glad I went through that process of not knowing that there was more to it than just that, because it helps us to identify with people along the way, and the dangers of trying to take on too much at one time. What's you guys' thoughts on chapter 6?
The the verse that you mentioned, or the the part that you mentioned, do what you can.
Mhm.
This this passage um, is a critical one because up until now, you don't have anything that says you are to keep the Torah, and it's all implied. It's all, if you were, you would see it there. But now we have um, a direct statement to be like Yeshua and to do what you can to follow.
Mhm.
And so it, it's this verse, one verse sticks out among the other texts, and in just the sequence of these statements from the way of life, the way of death, and now we are going through, you know, don't let follow good teaching, bear the yoke of the Lord concerning food, and then we're going to get to baptism in just a moment, the immersion or some expansion on that. And uh, if if this is a sequence that's leading to conversion or a teaching in conversion, here it says before you are baptized, before you take the Eucharist in chapter 10 for the first time, before take up the yoke of the Lord,
Yeah.
study it. And in Deuteronomy 5:1, it says, study first and then do. This is the opposite of the Exodus passage of we will do and then
Yeah.
understand. It's the command to study it first and then. So here we have the convert actually being instructed to study Torah and to
Yeah.
practice what they can of it.
And let me make note of something that you mentioned there, Mark, is it seems that as though it's a contradiction to the Exodus verse, but we have to understand that we have real people here that are a part of two totally different groups. Okay? And what do I mean by that? Well, this right over here, chapter 6 and the rest of the Didache was written to Gentiles. These were people who knew nothing about the Jewish way of life. But however, in Exodus, these were Jews getting ready to leave Egypt, or maybe they had already left Egypt at that point.
Right.
And there, they are among Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, who is hearing from Hashem on a daily basis. And then the first time a commandment is given of the of all the commandments of the of the Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu goes and says, "Okay, seventh day is the Shabbos. We're gonna rest on the Shabbos." There's somebody over there. Hey, Moshe, what is that? What is that? Tell us about this. Now, these are things that aren't recorded, but we see that Moshe Rabbeinu. It says that in Parshas Yisro that he's sitting over there talking with Jethro, and he's sitting there just like, dude, I can't take it, man. These people are
Right.
constantly asking me questions and all this stuff. I don't have time for all this. And this is when he suggests, well, put together a council of individuals to kind of help you out here. People who you say this stuff to, it clicks with them, and kind of delegate that out a little bit. This was a much different group. The outcome is the same, but the mechanics are slightly different from one group to the other. So there's no contradiction there as well. I just wanted to make note of that.
And correct. And in this passage, you are instructing Gentiles to take up the full yoke of the Lord, and so it is if do what they can, do what they
Mhm.
can, and so um, it, I think it's more than just giving them permission to study Torah or to study um, whatever text they might have. I think it's permission to do.
Mhm.
They can adopt the life of the community and take up that yoke and do as much as they can of
Yeah,
that community.
and the thing is that in this time, it's at some points in the Talmud it says, to not let a person go and do that on their own. So is there a contradiction there? No. Why? Because these individuals who were there, and we got to understand the Gemara section is much later than the Mishnah section
Right,
of the Talmud. So it's important to understand that. But at this time, you may have one Torah scroll in a 20-mile radius
right,
of of a Gentile community, that is outside of Israel. So where is it that you're going to go to study this? Where are you going to go to the shul? You're going to go and talk with the rabbi. You're going to
right,
go and talk with the elders there and all this stuff. So your study is going to be reliant upon them saying, hey, because the Gentiles didn't know, and vast majority of the Jews did not know Hebrew at that time since the Medo-Persian Empire.
right,
So the thing is, some of these Gentiles may have known Aramaic. A vast majority of them also may have spoken Greek, or whatever language was roaming around at that time in these provinces. And so the thing is, the main person that would know how to read this thing were always the highly intellectual individuals and the religious cognoscenti. They would be the ones that were still able to read Hebrew. And so the thing is, saying, okay, you guys went and spoke this whole thing. What exactly were you talking about there? They have to go over there and ask those questions. They're going to get kosher answers.
right. So there is a question though. Is it says to be complete?
Mhm.
If you can take up the yoke, is that exactly what it says? Yeah. If you can bear the whole yoke of the Lord, you will be complete. Is that a command for circumcision?
Well, you know what? Let's go to um
I don't.
the
I don't think
commentary.
so. I think that it's. I was gonna read something here out of Romans
Yeah.
that reminded me about this section here. It seems that the Didache is encouraging individuals to strive to take upon more of the Torah.
Mhm.
Uh, it leaves the door open for them to go beyond the Noahide laws, to go beyond the Acts chapter 15 list of mitzvot, and go further into the Torah, right? But it says if you cannot, then don't let it become burdensome to you, but go ahead and back off and just do what you can.
Mhm.
In Romans chapter 2, verse 14, it says, whenever a Gentile who have no Torah do naturally what the Torah requires, then these, even though they don't have Torah for themselves, are Torah. For their lives show that the conduct the Torah dictates is written in their hearts. Their consciences also bear witness to this, for their conflicting thoughts sometimes accuse them and sometimes defend them. And you go further down on chapter 2, verses 25 through 27 are very revealing. And that hits directly upon what Mark asked, if you become whole, does that mean circumcision? Well, I think that a person can lead to be a proselyte and do full conversion. But if they don't, I think that they can still be whole without a circumcision. Because It says here that it says in Romans chapter 2, verse 25, for circumcision is indeed of value if you do what the Torah says. But if you're a transgressor of Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Therefore, if an uncircumcised man keeps the righteous requirements of the Torah, won't his uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? Indeed, the man who is physically uncircumcised but obeys the Torah, he will stand as a judgment on you who have had Brit Milah and have Torah written out but violate it.
Mm-hmm.
So what Paul is pushing here is that there are individuals that keep Torah, obviously, and they have taken upon the yoke of the Lord. They have taken upon the yoke of Torah. They're not circumcised, but they will stand as a judgment against those that do have circumcision and don't follow the Torah.
Absolutely.
So I think being whole or complete, I think that's more of a spiritual state of being, or a level of maturity in an individual, that they would that Hashem would see them and see them as someone who they're acting out and they're obeying of Torah. They will be counted as part of the circumcision, even though they're physically not circumcised. They have circumcised, basically circumcised the Yetzer Hara. They've circumcised their hearts.
Yep.
I could be
Absolutely.
wrong.
Here's what it says in the commentary. In here, it says the Didache teaches that those who can handle the whole yoke of the Lord will be complete. Complete is used in 1:4 to describe those who turn the other cheek, and it is used in 16:2 to describe those who remain faithful until the master returns. Disciples of Yeshua are to constantly strive toward the state of completion. The Greek word, and again, I'm not a Greek scholar, teleos corresponds to Hebrew tamim. Okay, well that I get. Unblemished, which the Torah is the required state for animals that are offered as sacrifices upon the altar. Additionally, Noah is called Tamim, blameless in Genesis 6:9, and Yaakov is designated Tam, blameless in Genesis 25:27. God tells Abraham, I am God Almighty, walk before me, and the blameless, Tamim, and I will make my covenant between me and you, and many and may multiply greatly. Um, let's see. Nahum Sarana notes, as applied to human beings, Tamim acquired a moral dimension connecting unblemished by moral default. Hence, a person of unimpeachable integrity. King David asks, who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blameless and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart. Psalm 15, 1 through 2. The master ends the first discourse on the Sermon of the Mount with the injunction, you therefore shall be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Matthew 5:48. The Didache points the Gentile believer to the direction of fuller observance of the Torah in the light of the teachings of the Master and the Apostles, but at the same time, it leaves it room for those whom it would be unbearable and too difficult in their current situation. In a similar way, the Master says, not everyone can receive this saying, but only those whom it is given. Matthew 19:11. And the Apostle Paul adds, I wish that you that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind to one another. 1 Corinthians 7:7. So hopefully that helps.
It does help. I I am going to have to do more research on what it means to be complete, because of the verse in 16:2. And I know we're not in 16 yet, but it says, gather together often, seeking what is appropriate for your lives, because your entire time of faithfulness will be of no benefit to you if you will not have been made complete at the end of time. So
Here's
your
another thing to
entire pursuit.
here's another thing to think about. One of the things that's a rabbinic premise that is not within here is um the fact that all throughout, and Rabbi Shalom Arush mentions this often in Gan Eden, in the garden, or I'm sorry, Gan HaShalom, in the Garden of Peace. He says that a man is not complete until he is married. And it's for the same things that we mentioned earlier. Oh, and it's funny, my little sister's getting married Saturday.
Huh.
Speaking of
Are,
which.
are you implying that a marriage to Yeshua, the way of Yeshua's life, is what makes you complete? And if you do not, if you are not married to Yeshua by the end of your life, then all of your faithfulness, all of your actions will be voided.
I think it's twofold because, again, a man cannot get the title of Adam until he is physically married to his wife. But also, the thing is that considering Didache is a rabbinic text, I think all of those things are a part
I
of
agree.
uh, of of
Can,
of the truth in that.
so can I ask one of my $1 million questions then?
Have at
It
it.
it fits right now, because you said rabbinic text.
I weigh
So
170 pounds. I hope that answers.
no,
No, okay.
the question is this. Um, so I saw in my research that a fragment of the Didache, several fragments actually were found at the Dura Europa synagogue in Syria, and it
Hmm.
was written in Hebrew or
Hmm.
Aramaic. So we know, according to uh, um, Eusebius, he says Papias said that there was a Hebrew version of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, and that the first 200 years or so of the bishops of Jerusalem were circumcised. They were Jews until 325, I think, actually. So, so that means and the text of the Didache was in Palestinian script.
Hmm.
So it probably came from Jerusalem. So we have a Hebrew gospel or Aramaic primus. You're an Aramaic primus. We have an
Yeah.
Aramaic text of the gospel. We've got only Jews leading the community, the Judeo-Christian community in Jerusalem. You have the Didache in Hebrew or Aramaic. Uh, could it be that I know the Septuagint was in Greek, and I know Greek was everywhere, but could it be that the Didache was either translated from the Greek into Hebrew for the community or started out in Hebrew or Aramaic because of the Hebraisms within the text?
Okay, there's a lot of things to unpack there. And first of all, the quote that it is that you mentioned is often a shortened quote. Okay, some people have taken parts of the quote. Now, the full quote is that there's the Gospel of Matthew written in the language of the Hebrews. Okay. Now, the thing is that many people think that that means Hebrew. It doesn't. Okay,
Right.
because of the fact that the people, again, were not reading, Hebrew, speaking Hebrew, except for the religious cognoscenti and the highly intelligent and well-educated individuals. Um, so, to put it into Hebrew wouldn't really make very much sense, especially considering that, in that area, a vast majority of the people spoke one or two languages, Greek or Aramaic. I'm an Aramaic primist, based upon many different things. But there's many people that propagate a Hebrew Matthew. And what are those Hebrew Matthew scripts? One is called the Munster.
Right.
The other one is called the Dutelet. The other one is called the Shem Tov. Now, the Dutelet, really funny. It's 16th century.
Right.
The the Shem Tov Matthew, there's books written about that thing. It was created by the Catholic Church
Right.
because they were in a debate with somebody, and they, it documents them creating it. But there's a lot of people that propagated, especially in the Hebrew roots movement, simply because it's Hebrew, it has to be old. And I
Mhm.
used to be a part of that when I was a part of that movement. Oh, if it's Hebrew, then it's old. I later realized that there are thousands of manuscripts, and a vast majority of them are 8th century or later, um, in both languages, Hebrew and Aramaic. That's why I'm not a big fan of, say, for instance, George Lambsa's Aramaic text. Why is that? He uses 72 manuscripts. Now you have 72 manuscripts. You got some that are old, and then you got some that are 18th century, all the way up into that.
Right.
Um, so what you're doing is you're watering down the old texts with the new texts that are translated from Greek. So
Right.
you're really not having an Aramaic translation there in any way. So in terms of Didache, um, I would say that we've heard so much about different fragments of things that have not turned out to be authentic. I don't know if how many scholars have looked at this thing. I didn't even know about it, to be perfectly honest. But I would basically say, well, it's a great possibility if it's true, but also have healthy skepticism at the same time and say, let's see how this plays out. Because it sounds like there's debate as to whether or not it's in Hebrew or Aramaic.
Hmm.
So if that's the case, then those who are documenting it, how do we even know it's Didache?
Right.
The research, it doesn't seem to be very extensive if they can't even identify the language, but they can just identify the script.
Yeah.
Um,
It,
so
I think the fragments are too small.
okay,
That, but significantly, the fragments were, if the translation of the fragments were Birkot Hamatzon, they were, the part of the Eucharistic
yeah,
section of the Didache, but they were structured like a Birkot. So,
okay,
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam is the beginning of it,
yeah,
and and so because of the similarities, they thought, well, this is a bridge
yeah.
text, sort of a
Well,
proto Eucharistic text.
here's the question. Considering it's so small, could it be documents of Takanot instead, and maybe not exactly Didache? Or is it possible that the Greek text for some did have to be translated into Aramaic? And that gets us at the point to where it is that you have the scholars battling it out between Greek primacy and Aramaic primacy.
Right, right,
There's good arguments both ways. So for me, first of all, to not know the history of the textual criticisms of Didache personally,
right.
and to not know the textual criticisms of this supposed text, I think I would be very dishonest to try and veer one way or another on that.
It's the Dura Europos synagogue in
Okay.
Syria where they found the text, and it was in a wall, and there were several fragments of it. Um, and so it's probably And it's a fairly recent find. So my guess is they're going to continue to work on it for a while before
Okay.
they make a conclusion.
Eh,
But is it possible, given that Jerusalem was speaking Aramaic, that there would have been a copy of the
Oh,
Didache in Aramaic?
yeah, yeah. I think it's possible. I think it's possible.
Hmm.
Um, you know, but we shall see. Phil, do
I
you have
have.
any thoughts on that?
On what Mark brought up,
Yeah.
I think that yeah, I mean, I think that it could, like, all translations would be a possibility to reach all different sectors of individuals.
Mhm.
What it was originally written in, who knows? I mean, that's going to be the debate until Mashiach comes back and we can ask him.
Oh yeah, and I think
But I
that
think
if we even tried to answer it, we'd be operating out of our own biases.
right.
You know.
I
Although,
think there are. This is where I kind of just contemplate things as far as the Greek is concerned, because I think if we use the Septuagint as the baseline of which Greek words to use that correspond what the Hebrew counterpart is, then I think that that type of Greek will capture the Hebraic idioms when it's
probably.
reverse translated.
But see, I would
And
ask this
so,
question though: would
but
it, if there is such a vast gap in time period, when you look at the ways of Hashkafa?
I don't think it would. The further from the source you get, the harder it is to find those idioms. I would think, because the Greek itself, the language evolves itself.
And yet the Brit
The
Hadashah utilizes a great portion of the Septuagint.
Exactly, exactly, and because they have to, Franz Delitzsch, what he did is he used the Septuagint to reverse translate the whole Brit Hadashah,
Mhm.
and where when he came across a Greek word that didn't have the equivalency in the Septuagint, he went to the closest thing in the Septuagint to that Greek word,
And,
Yeah,
and
and
this and this is a really important point that Philip's bringing up, because if you can uh, shadow or shade the Greek translation based upon which source it comes from, then if you discern a Hebraism or a Semitic idiomatic phrase within the Didache, uh, you could then maybe shadow its meaning by looking at the Aramaic rather than the Greek.
possibly so. Possibly so. And the reason why I say that is because there's one point that I remember years ago, people were bringing this to my attention. It's like, oh, nope, nope, nope. The four-letter name is in the New Testament. And I always said, no, nope, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not in there. But what would they always source me? The Dailage.
Yeah,
Because there's a part in there every time that Franz Dailage would go and be sourcing the Torah, the Ketuvim, or the Nevi'im, he would basically copy and paste from the Masoretic text. Okay. So there was one part in there to where, the Aramaic doesn't have the four-letter name in this verse, the Greek doesn't, and none of the other texts do, of the various base texts of Aramaic and Greek and the later Hebrew ones. None of them have it in there except for Franz Delitzsch. And I said, this is one of the mistakes that Franz Delitzsch made. He didn't make many,
right,
but he did make one here
right,
because of the
right.
fact that the four-letter name is not in there. And he just kind of lifted that verse from the Masoretic and put it in there. So that kind of plays into that to some degree, you
Right.
know,
That's right.
E- especially with, all the things that he got right, which was a vast majority. But the very few times you get something wrong, it can be a little bit devastating
Right.
on those things. So, yeah.
I,
Okay.
I
Oh,
do.
go ahead.
I I know that we're getting close to our time, but I still had another $1 million question I needed to ask you. So if I could
Okay.
try to get it out, or do you want to just focus on the text that we were working on earlier?
Is it going to be a part of chapter 7 or 8?
It's an application of the Didache.
Yeah,
So
we'll allow it.
you're going to allow it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, all right. If the Didache is a text for conversion, the route to conversion, just assumption here. If the purpose of the Didache is to teach a new convert, well, before they're baptized, they have to say certain things, and they have to learn to be like Yeshua, and so forth. And before they're baptized, then they can have the Eucharist because there's a sequence going on. It's kind of like a manual on
Yep.
how they're supposed to. Okay, if that's the case, here's the critical question. You could get a smicha on the laws of conversion.
Mm-hmm.
For Ani Judaism, are you moving from the laws of conversion to the Didache?
Okay, the thing to realize with the Didache is that I don't see the Didache, and I don't think most do, that this is for a person doing a full conversion. Okay, this is the starting point for many people. This is the starting point for your congregants. Some people will, you know, end up being a ger toshav. Some will be ger sadiqim.
Yeah,
To say that every person, when you say this, okay, this is going to start your conversion to Judaism because you're all converting. Whoa, wait a minute. Here, slow your roll. The followers of Shammai who went against the believers in Yeshua in Acts 15, which Acts 15 comes up many times all throughout this text. We don't need to be like the followers of Shammai because that can be devastating. This is their starting point. This
okay.
is their starting point.
So I want to just clarify what you're saying. For someone to come to our community, our synagogue here in Arkansas, what we'll do is once they say, "Yeah, I want to join your community," I'll say, let me tell you about the different stages and what
Yep.
you don't take all the mitzvot at one time. You can study and you could do what you can. But here's a book that we're going to look at here
Yep.
just to begin, and it's called the Didache. The people who come to this, who will not know what this book has, are not just Gentiles, but the Jewish people in the community as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the Jewish people coming to Ani Judaism will have to convert.
No, not at all. Not at all. But the thing is, here's one of the things you need to watch out for, because you're going to tell them to start out with this. And you're going to tell them, read this, study this. And I've had this happen so many times. And these are the people that are not going to stick around.
Right.
It's going to be important to identify them.
Right.
They will come in with their book. They will said that they have read it, but then their questions are, well, I saw on YouTube this thing about this meteor that's coming towards the earth, or I was just told that the Zohar says this, totally unrelated to
Right.
anything in here. When you start getting that, you say, hey, either you need to start focusing or I'm wasting my time here.
Mm-hmm.
Because those people are the ones that are going to be hopping.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get a lot of synagogue hoppers
Mm-hmm.
and congregation hoppers that is like, okay, I want to go someplace where the person agrees with me and that will just shoot the crap with me,
Right.
and
Right.
I want the Jewish yogi to just explain these things to me, you're going to get a lot of those.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So, the order of these things is going to be very crucial. Okay.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Not a problem. I know we're a little bit past time here, but any thoughts? I know we weren't able to get to 7 and 8. Basically, chapter 7, just really quickly, it's the whole do what you can. It's like, okay, if you can't do this, then do this with the water. Immerse in this way, just as long as it's getting done. You know, it's a good thing. You know, uh, chapter 8, you know, um, you know what? We should probably talk about chapter 8 next week as well. So,
Okay.
because there's a lot to go over there, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions. So,
So in 7, though, it's the first extra biblical source that talks about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit as part
mhm.
of the immersion
Yep.
or as part of the baptism.
Well, you could kind of
And,
say that it's in the Zohar, but the timing of the Zohar,
and is
like
this the
it's up for debate.
and is this the first extra biblical source that talks about non-immersion?
Hmm.
Uh-huh.
Well, what do you mean?
Well, I think all the other sources talk about an immersion, but now we have the potential for a non-immersion
Oh,
and
God, I see what you're talking about. Yeah,
just a pouring on the head 3 times.
as far as I know, there. Well, come to think about it, there might be something in the Talmud on that. I'll have to look, but I think I'll have to look. I'll have
I,
to
I,
look.
I think you're right. There is something in the Talmud about it. Um, it's just triggering in the back of my mind as well.
And I think it was
Uh,
also in Shulchan Aruch when we were looking through that as well.
could very
I
well
think it
be.
was. I'll have to look and see. But yeah.
Yeah, right.
All right.
So, and the other sort of thing that the baptism shows, the baptism is described as something that would happen in a desert. So it may place the Didache in a desert community
Hmm.
as the source of origin.
I think
Yeah.
it covers
Yeah.
it all. It covers people living by a river, people living by the ocean, people living
Yeah.
by a well that's dug, people living by a well that's not dug, and people living in the desert.
Well, I
So
think
it's
he's also talking about, like if you can't
That's
is
good.
what he's meaning by that. But yeah, yeah. You guys are, as the guy said on Fiddler on the Roof, you're both right.
Right?
Yeah. So, but yeah. Anything else, guys?
Hey, great
Somebody's
class.
tea's done.
just that last part on chapter 7, verse 4.
Yeah.
The admonition or the recommendation that the one performing the mikvah, the immersion, this isn't, uh, obviously, there's someone there to oversee this whole ritual happening, and
Hmm.
that individual should fast in addition to the person being immersed.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny. That was one of the things when Amy read that, when she first started reading the Didache, she was just kind of blown away by that, she never knew that. And she was like, "Oh, that makes sense." And it's been about a year since she's looked at it, but
When I read that, I see a very I don't know, maybe I do this just by nature. I see a very mystical part behind it. There's a
Mhm.
reason, there's a purpose for it. Why fast? We can go through a whole explanation as to why we need to fast, but there is something uh, uh, that happens in the spiritual realm that I think we should all be aware of. And what those things are, I mean, it could be innumerable different things, but a person is literally declaring himself no longer a citizen of this world, but now a citizen of the kingdom of God. And now he serves the God of Israel, and no longer serves the God of the nations.
Mm-hmm.
He serves the God of Israel, and he's making his allegiance to that God. And so this is a very big thing. This is a declaration to the cosmos, to the powers in the heavenlies. This is a declaration to all of them, making a statement that you're no longer part of them, but you're part of this God.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rabbi. It's been a great class.
Not a problem, guys. I will see you guys next. Oh, by the way, the thing to be thinking about. Okay, you guys have to do as your final project. You and I know that it's going to be way before that of Yom Kippur, but you're going to have to do an hour-long drosh on Yom Kippur. And that will be the final assignment that will be due at the end of September. And you'll have a month to work on it after we get done with class here. Now you can do that. I was also given an alternative as well. An hour-long video defining what Ani Judaism is. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, guys, I will catch up with you next
I'm
week.
writing here.
Say what?
I said I was writing. No,
Oh,
I don't have any questions.
all right. Let's see here. Let's see. Chapters 9, 10, 11, 12 for next week.
Okay.
We're going to cover chapter 8.
Yeah,
no?
yeah, we'll dive into that quickly and we'll try and move past the other ones, at a pretty
Okay.
good speed. All right,
Sounds
guys.
good.
I'll see you. Shalom.
Shalom.
All right.